Let's go.
It's not a very good whisper, is it?
We're good? Okay, we'll call this work session to order. Today we're going to talk about something that's been underway for at least a year specifically, and for a lot longer than that. So today I'm going to turn it over to our Community Development Director, who has been working on it from day one since he came and got that job.
All right, well, this is a part of our comprehensive plan, but this was extrapolated out by Clatsop County, and they are doing these reports for every city and unincorporated county to take a look at our housing inventory, our infrastructure, and our buildable lands inventory. So they've gone to Gearhart, Cannon Beach, Astoria, unincorporated county, and Warrenton, and they are taking a comprehensive look of what we have for housing and what we have for availability to build more housing. So I have Steve Faust from 3J. He's another arm of 3J. Scott's doing our comprehensive plan. Steve's taken on this project with Alyssa Gertler, the Clatsop County Housing Manager. I'll turn it over to them and let them show you what they found.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good to see you guys. Alyssa Gertler, Clatsop County Housing Manager. I haven't met all of you, so it's nice to meet you. 2 years ago when I took this job at the county as the housing manager, which was a position that the county had wanted, but I never had, one of the first things people said to me is, hey, there's this 2019 housing study, and it was kind of generic. It didn't really sum up our issues, but it brought up some key questions about buildable land and what kind of housing we need and for whom and what's the population growth. And if you're going to work at the county, you should really take this report and run with it. And so we have the Regional Housing Task Force, which is a county-wide housing group that the mayor sits on, and a number of other elected officials and community partners from each city in the county, who work together on housing, kind of recognizing that each city doesn't need to solve housing all by themselves. As you often say, Mayor, we're all connected here economically and at the housing level and across transportation, and you guys probably know this better than I do. And so we decided that we would work as a region to look at our housing needs, and specifically, as Jeff said, buildable land, infrastructure, and sort of a needs analysis. What is our supply? What's our demand? Who's it for? And so we got a grant from the State Department of Land Conservation and Development a year ago to basically do this report, and we're right on schedule to finish it. So as Jeff said, we're now presenting to each city. I think you'll see what we've heard from other cities is, you have done a great job of defining the problem here. Now let's talk about the solution. And so I think it's really helpful to have more information and sort of more up-to-date, specific for each community information about your land, your infrastructure, your housing supply. But it also begs the question of what next? And so we want to give you this information with the idea, knowing that Seaside in particular has really been quite proactive about housing and taking really good steps to help you think about how this might inform what you do next. And so I would like to introduce Steve to walk you through the findings.
Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Steve Faust with 3J Consulting. Not necessarily a different arm of 3J, but maybe different fingers of the same arm with Scott. Thanks for having us here. I think Alyssa gave us a good introduction. Both Jeff and Alyssa mentioned buildable land inventories, infrastructure needs, and inventory of housing supply are the three pieces of the work that we've done. We did start, as Jeff said, or as the mayor said, I think a little over a year ago. We've met with the task force a few times to report some higher level findings. Then we drafted the three pieces. We met with Jeff virtually to kind of look at a map and say, all right, this map says this area is vacant, but what's the real story? It can look vacant in a buildable land inventory, but might not necessarily be buildable. So now we're kind of bringing this information to you, as Alyssa said, and we'll be preparing final reports following this meeting with any feedback from you, and to incorporate the information we got from Jeff at our meeting with him, any other final details. We really want to make these as reports as accurate and useful as possible. So, starting with the buildable land inventory, which determines the amount of developable land available within the UGB. for just in case anyone's not familiar with the buildable land inventory, we start with the full supply, in this case of residentially zoned land. We take out different constraints like stream corridors, steep slopes, wetlands sometimes can be removed and sometimes not. Actually, most of the time not. I'll talk about that a little. Well, actually, I can just say it now. The state only allows us to remove wetlands from properties with wetlands from the inventory if the city has code that restricts development on properties with wetlands, and most communities do not have that. They have some sort of guidance or regulations, but that allow mitigation and allow some level of development. So wetlands actually rarely get removed from the inventory. We also remove unsuitable lands that might be public right-of-way, public parks, historic sites, small properties that already have units on them and are unbuildable, and then properties that are not serviceable by infrastructure. And when we take all those things out, we're left with our buildable land.
Sorry to interrupt you so
Sure.
early, but did you actually go parcel by parcel throughout
So,
the whole city?
We started with the GIS data that we have.
Yeah.
And then we worked with Jeff to say, hey, let's look at the buildable land inventory, determine do these look right? Are any of these misdesignated, and tried to refine that and get a pretty accurate inventory.
Yeah, I did try to take a look at each one, but I don't have historical knowledge on every property in the city. So when you guys review these reports, if you see something that looks correct or requires further exploration, bring it up and we'll look at it, try to take a closer look at it, and make the goal here is to get this as accurate as possible.
And we can provide Jeff and therefore you with, because right now the maps are in our report, but maps that you can really zoom in on and take a look a little more closely maybe than what the draft report allows you to do. So we can provide you with those. Just some of the BLI findings, nothing you don't know here. Significant constraints for Seaside include the floodplain, steep slopes, and then wetlands. Most of the larger buildable parcels in the city are east of Highway 101. And then in terms of the size of lots, which is really important because we get a lot of our inventory oftentimes being made up of 1 acre or less parcels scattered about a city. And that's really hard to do infill development on any real, with any real impact. So 199 of the 232 buildable lots are less than 1 acre. There are some larger sites of 20 sites with more than 5 acres. That's about 47 acres of land. When we get closer to the end of our conversation, that's probably some of the areas that you're already getting ready to have new housing development happen.
Why am I not understanding the math of 20 lots that are larger than 5 acres only equaling 47?
Because that must be an error. Thank you for that. Maybe that's the combination of larger than 1 acre, like 1 to 5 and 5 plus. I'll take another look at that. Actually, if you could look in the, maybe you can look for it while I continue the presentation.
I reread it like 4 times and I went, wait a minute.
Thank you for that. I'm surprised I didn't catch that. So this first map shows vacant lands. The dark purple are the partially vacant lands. There's some sort of development on them. The green parcels are vacant. So this is before we remove any constraints from the vacant land supply. Good to see you. So in terms of total vacant or partially vacant acres, we have about 160 acre, or 170 acres more or less before removing constraints. As you can see again, the 100-year floodplain is a major impact, bodies of water, steep slopes as well. So a lot of constraints impacting that vacant and partially vacant land.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Are you taking into consideration all the stuff from the FEMA buyout?
I believe that was all incorporated. That's my understanding from our GIS folks, that they included that.
My question when reading it, is it counted mobile home parks as still buildable land?
Should not be, well, it could be as part vacant, depending on if there's area for more. There's kind of rules about how you look at parcels that have development on them and how much land is remaining. But typically, if they have mobile home parks, those shouldn't be identified as
They definitely called it out specifically in there.
As
that
partially
was
vacant?
As buildable land.
right, which it could be, like I said, depending, part of it could be, right?
Okay.
I think we'll have to take a closer look, thanks for that,
Yeah.
at like how many acres it's identifying as buildable.
Okay.
Because it's gonna show up if there's any capacity, even if it's a 20 acre site and there's 2 acres, it's gonna show up as an opportunity. So this is for the whole city, not just for the vacant land, but obviously 35% of the land in the city is constrained. And when we remove those constraints, we're left with this, which is much patchier once you're removing your slopes and your other constraints. You can see there's some vacant parcels down in this area. You've got some vacant here. You've got that purple parcel up above that's partially vacant. Is that where one of the parks is?
I'm not sure what that is without zooming in.
Probably 1,000 Trails.
Yeah, that's probably that's Thousand Trails,
Okay.
the north side of it.
Well, we'll continue to refine with comments from you and with Jeff taking another look.
Yeah.
But what we're left with is about
That's floodplain.
total buildable of about 83.5 acres once we remove all those constraints. So I heard, did you see?
It's not correct in here either.
Okay. We'll take another look at that then. Thank you. So take another look at the parcel size table, and then we can dial in a little bit on the mobile home parks to see how those are showing up in the inventory to make sure they're getting recorded accurately. Any other questions about buildable land inventory?
I think your plan, and that was, I assumed that we were gonna see it eventually be able to drill down to actual parcels. Homework for counselors is to look at your ward or wards specifically before you look at anybody else's. And go through it with a fine tooth comb and see if you agree with what they've done. And if you don't, then send something to Jeff.
So Jeff, I'll follow up this week with maps that you can share with folks that allow you to really zoom in.
Great, yeah, that would help.
If you wouldn't mind going back real quick, one parcel that has been the subject of controversy is this one right here. Has there been any movement, Jeff, to try to develop that?
So that, I've had inquiries about it, but nothing's actually come in with a development plan. There was an attempt to develop that in the 90s that went through LUBA, and as far as I could find the records, it just never materialized. That's also a discrepancy in our UGB that Scott is working on, because we're, with our comp plan, we're also going to adopt a new zoning map that'll digitize our zoning map and clear up some of these UGB errors. So that's an area where we have a discrepancy. I think we figured it out based on what the state has on file. And then part of that is zoned R2, but it's not inside the city. So there's been some weird things that were done in the 90s that we've just never been able to walk the history back on.
So your thoughts are that is developable, because that's the big chunk of our available land, but it's been a big controversy whether that can even be developed.
It is developable. I don't know if our infrastructure can handle a development of that size. That's something we would have to have a look at before we went down that path. But it's, from my perspective, it's zoned R2, it's inside our urban growth boundary. That line will shift a little bit depending on what the mapping shows when we finish our new zoning map.
So is that area, when you drive up?
Yeah. It's
Is
kind of
that-
behind the houses. I don't know if you recall the Save Our Trees.
Yeah.
That was
Oh,
what they were
that's what
referring
that
to.
area
And that's
is.
kind of why I wanted to bring that up, is I don't know,
Yeah.
what the history of that property is, or if it can be.
And my assumption is the reason that not all of that is green is because of the slope.
There's some slope there.
So you'd have some slope issues getting to just the little green
There's a
patches.
stream down there. There's some wetlands down there too.
There's a slope,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why it's,
So the area that is south as you drive up, that's all wooded, is that what we're talking
Yeah,
about?
that's the area you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah.
But it goes down and then it also comes back up. I mean, I want to say that's like in total, like a 500 acre parcel, but not all of it's in our UGB.
Right.
And anybody wants to come look at the 90s situation, I've got 3 or 4 boxes and you're welcome to go through it and try to make heads or tails of it.
One of the other things to note, and it's not as pronounced in Seaside as some of your neighbor communities, but once you take those constraints away, what was a big patch of, I'll go back, a big patch of green or purple, like you see over here, turns into these more dispersed, smaller patches once you remove the constraints. And now something that in the first map looked very developable is like, well, can we even get infrastructure to that site? How much can we get as a return in terms of number of units on those sites? Is it going to cost out in terms of, what you can get on the site? So,
That big purple area has to be Thousand Trails. And so it shows as big vacant area if you take a picture when it's not full of trailers and campsites and other uses.
but is it privately owned?
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably why. Because if it was publicly owned, it would be removed, but if it's privately owned, so we can take a look at that. Okay.
One other thing, just for the fun of it, we went through this in about 2015, 2016. You look down the lower right corner where there's that kind of big square, right there, south. That's all outside the urban growth boundary. And back then we tried exploring the idea of extending the urban growth boundary to bring more housing availability, and the people that lived there were dead set against it.
Just,
We ended up not doing anything.
and just so you know, those same residents have an agreement with the city to provide water, which expires in about 7 years, and are interested in
At the end of the road.
renewing that agreement. I have a
So
letter
we
from them.
could hold that hostage?
Now. It's basically everything south of Avenue S in the corner. of the
Right,
current
in that
unit.
corner.
Didn't they
That's
identify
awful.
that was one of the only large flat parcels that's even
There was
available?
that, and then one of our concerned citizens that lived down in the area past the cove there suggested that this should be one that be included too.
Isn't that zoned agriculture?
Timberland right now, I think.
Well, that gets to
Part
this.
of the agriculture part is timber.
That gets to this number here, the 83.5 acres of buildable. The better job we do refining the buildable land inventory with your help and with Jeff's help and get down to the actual number, the whole impetus for expanding an urban growth boundary is, does your 20-year demand exceed your supply? So the more realistic we are about supply, the more possibility there is of looking at that
And that's
land.
The basic reason why we stopped doing it is because we didn't have anything that really said we need this supply
Yeah.
for the future.
So you take out Thousand Trails and we're down to about 35.
Because,
Could be.
Thousand Trails isn't gonna sell that land.
Yeah, I don't think they're going anywhere.
However,
Yeah, but it's.
I will say,
No.
we can talk to DLCD, but the likelihood that they'll let us remove that Thousand Trails is not great, because they're gonna say that's privately owned property. Someone in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, the owner could decide that they wanna develop it. We have to demonstrate that it's, it's some
Then
sort
look
of
at the
permanent
flooding.
use.
Look at the flooding that
It
happens.
spends a good chunk of the year underwater. So I mean, it's not even 100-year flood, it's annual, it's flooding.
And that's floodplain or wetland? Because again, the wetlands are a challenge.
Probably wetland, but
Worse
Yeah.
than wetland, less than floodplain.
yeah.
There's kind of this discrepancy, and right now, there's, Alyssa knows as well, we're part of the process to do rulemaking about housing at the state level, and one of the things our group that we work with is looking at is how do we make these buildable lands inventories more realistic? And it's not just all this paper capacity that you say exists, but then when you get down to it, it's really not very buildable. So we hope that refinements in state law are gonna help us with this process. But for now, your review can really help us with the process. Okay, infrastructure needs. This part of our reporting was pretty challenging. for two reasons. Number one, we relied on water, sewer, and transportation system plans. Often a little bit out of date, number one. And number two, especially water and sewer, really look at system capacity as a whole and improvements that are needed as a whole, but they don't always specify, okay, what's needed, they don't call out like, oh, what infrastructure is needed to serve this area in particular or that area in particular. It's just not how they're designed. So without the conversations with Jeff, we'd have very little to go on, which is bigger picture items like this. So we looked at the water system plan, the transportation system plan, the capital improvement program. And we have these bigger picture needs, right? A wastewater treatment plant, water filter plant, water reservoirs, and water and sewer pump stations, either new or improvements to those facilities. That tells us about the system overall. Those are certainly very important and very important to serving these expansion areas, but it doesn't tell us if there's any specific infrastructure needs to reach certain areas. And that's what we talked with Jeff about, and I don't have a lot on today, but in our final report, we're gonna have a map with opportunity sites and cite different infrastructure needs that could unlock additional lands for housing.
So we have an RFP going out soon for an update to our wastewater treatment plan. And by this time next year, we hope to be on our way with our water master plan update. Will this be configured in such a way that when those are updated, we can easily insert it in here, for lack of better saying, and it updates, or would it require a whole new revision of the document?
No, I think, and we can provide you with Word versions of these things, but I think we right now can make sure if it's not already in there, that information that the city is looking to upgrade these systems is in there. And then once it is, you'll be able to just swap out what we had written about the infrastructure and put in new pieces.
It'd be, I mean, ideally what we want is, good information going in to get good information out.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think, we didn't write the reports in a way that there's any numbers or anything about capacity that are impacted. But the executive, the final report, the executive summary that we are preparing would change because we're identifying opportunity sites that are currently not feasible because of infrastructure needs. And so that would be the one piece that you'd be able to really update and say, okay, now some of these pieces that before we couldn't develop now are developable. Okay, the third leg of the report was housing supply. We started with just basic demographics. Seaside has seen a moderate but steady growth over the last 20 years. According to the Portland State University Population Research Center, they expect another 2,000 or so residents over the next 50 years. Long period of time, probably pretty standard. What?
Well, we went from, in 20 years, we went up, 20%, but we're only gonna go up another 20% in 50 years.
Seems low to me,
Makes no sense to
Very
me.
low.
given the apartments and everything that are going.
Can I say something about, this is all based on the Portland State University population
Right,
forecast.
right.
And that's
as
what we
you
hear all
know,
the time.
yeah.
It's-
It's
Which they weren't
statewide.
very accurate before.
They're projecting low, they're projecting far less growth than we've seen in the past, and frankly, every city in Clatsop County is like, this doesn't seem right. Gerhart is actually challenging it, and so I think you guys are raising an issue that we know about in the county and need to keep bringing up.
It doesn't take into account the movement that happened during COVID, because it's back to 2020.
Right.
And so the increased movement of people around just different places, it isn't captured in that data.
I actually think their methodology doesn't work in the recreational communities because of that very point.
Towards the end, we'll have a slide that focuses on needed housing units, and let's see how that matches up with this or does not match up with this. That'll be interesting. In terms of population distribution, it's, Seaside is similar to the county overall. About 26% of the population is retirement age, so 65 and older. You can see that 50 to 80 is a pretty big chunk, not as much as Cannon Beach, obviously, but more so than Astoria and Warrenton. Seaside also has one of the smaller youth populations, not drastically different or smaller, but a little bit different than some of the others. In terms of cost burden, so cost burden is defined as households that spend 30% or more of their income on their housing. 46% of occupied housing in Seaside is homeowners. 46%, which is pretty low actually relative to some of the other communities. About 38% of those homeowners are cost burden. So again, spending 30% or more of their income on housing. For renters, the inverse of that, 54% of occupied housing in Seaside is renter occupied, and about 51, so half of renters are cost burden or spending more than that 30% on their housing.
So where in the 46 and 54% do, I would imagine second homes are in the 46%, but the homes that are simply owned and used as vacation rentals, where do they fall?
Either occupied, so these are.
We do have a little bit of information on that too. I can't pick that up for you specifically in these
There's a
numbers.
vacancy rate, I think.
Well, I'll get to that, yeah. Let's keep going and see if your question's answered, because there's so many nuances to this information. This is an interesting one looking at affordability. So this is for renter households in particular, and we have it broken down by income bracket. The green is the number of households you have at each income bracket from low to high, and the purple is the number of units that are available, rental units. So I think a lot of communities in Clatsop County have been thinking about that there's a workforce housing shortage, right? And there is. But you look at this and you're like, oh, for people who make 25 to 34, there's so many more housing units, rental units than there are households. But what we see here is at the low end, these households don't have enough housing at these very low ends. So they're spending way more than their income to pay for these. And we have the same issue on the high end, where for the few renters there are at the higher income levels, they're spending below what they can afford. And so what we end up is with a crunch in the middle. In terms of vacancy, so about 29% of housing units in Seaside are vacant. So almost 30%, almost a third of units are vacant. That's almost 1,500 units. 90% of those vacant units are second homes and short-term rentals. And then just 4.5% or 4.6% of those vacant units are available for purchase or for rent. So a very small percentage.
So if we can take a minute and break that down a little more, because our concern is always VRDs. What is our VRD number right now?
I think we're still right around 430 between
So
330
over
houses and 50 condos or so.
So over 1,000 of those are not vacation rentals that sit
Second homes.
vacant because people want to have them for their personal use.
Second homes.
Yeah.
Good observation.
And just by comparison, this is actually low compared to your neighbors in Cannon Beach and Seaside, where they have Cannon Beach has 70% or 69%.
I would expect that.
Right, and so it's an interesting comparison, and of course you would expect it, but
Yes.
you guys are actually doing well in some regards.
No. That's good, I hate that.
In terms of housing supply by housing type, so about a little more than 50% are single-family detached. Seaside actually has a nice variety of housing types relative to your neighbors. Middle housing, so up to 4 units, and townhomes represent about 23% of the housing stock. And then multifamily makes up 20%, and mobile homes 4%. So
And do we have any idea how many ADUs we have, and where would they fall?
I don't think that is census,
a good number to
included in the
have.
census.
Very few.
Yeah,
We
very-
don't, so we have the ADUs that have come into play since 2019 when the council passed the codes to put ADUs into our inventory. What we have a lot of are the beach cottages where there might be 2 or 3 or 4 small cottages on one lot that are non-conforming, but it's your kind of your ADU of times past. But I think we've probably permitted 5 ADUs in the last 2 years. It's not a huge amount of our supply.
I think there's some ADUs out there that just didn't get permitted.
There are.
I know some personally.
So relatively speaking, Seaside's doing pretty well in terms of variety of housing types, so that's great. We also looked, because we're kind of using some guidelines from the state around looking at what we call contextualized housing need. We looked at underserved communities. Most communities, the percent of white households that are homeowners is not 80 in the 80s or 90. In Seaside, it's closer to 50%, and 35% of all other households, all other races that are homeowners is 35%. And that's actually much higher than we see in other communities. So that's another encouraging thing to see, is that different community members are finding opportunities for home ownership. The rate of residents with disabilities in Seaside is higher than both the county and the state. I think that's the highest of any of the Clatsop County communities. 27% is pretty high. And all this is to say, we need to be thinking about what types of housing we're building. There's obviously a need for ADA compliant, universal design. I'm not an expert on different types of housing that's more accessible for people with disabilities, but that's certainly a consideration for Seaside.
Is there any correlation to the age? Because our age is pretty much higher than everybody else's too.
That's a good observation.
So.
Yeah,
you know.
that chart from before, I'm sure that there is a
Yeah.
correlation there.
And these statistics, are they mainly obtained from the American Community Survey?
We'd have to look at each one. I think some's from the 2020 census, but a lot's from the American Community Survey as well. And it should all be cited in the report. And then you're probably aware Clatsop County had the highest rate of homelessness per 1,000 residents compared to all other counties in Oregon. 926 people counted. So another issue that we just need to be aware of and be thinking about how our housing strategies can address that population. Next steps. So here's the chart that I mentioned earlier. This is, so in case you're not aware, Oregon has now changed the way we do housing. They call it housing capacity analysis. It used to be called the housing needs analysis. We used to get the population numbers from Portland State University, and then you or a consultant that you hired or your staff would extrapolate population growth into the number of housing units needed. Now that housing units needed number is allocated by the state. And so these are the numbers for Seaside that were allocated, I think, January 2025. So you can see the total for 1 year of the first year. I think they front loaded, because cities have a deficit right now. Most cities have a deficit in terms of their needed housing. So the 1 year is more front loaded than your overall, but it shows a need of 142 units for a 1 year need, and for the 20-year need, a little more than 1,800 units. And you can see most of those units are at the lowest income level. So I don't know if that aligns a little bit more with your thinking about how Seaside's going to be growing relative to that population forecast. You probably also know that because Seaside is less than 10,000 in population, these are not required targets for Seaside, whereas for Astoria, they need to develop strategies to meet their targets. Seaside does not because of the size.
So we would have to put 142 housing units into production annually to meet that, is what that's saying.
I think it's front loaded, so I think the 142 would decline over time. I haven't done the math to divide.
2,800 over 20 years.
If you did 142.
Right.
If you did, so that's
Right.
much higher than what the actual 20-year is. They said that the 142 is acknowledging that most communities have a deficit today that needs to be addressed, not just accommodating future growth, but like today there's a deficit that needs to be made up. So that 1 year is higher than just averaging it out.
I don't know how familiar you are with the methodology used in that, but they're assuming that essentially 90% of the people who are gonna move here or grow here are gonna be in the 0 to 30% AMI.
They're also saying that there's a significant deficit, as Steve was just saying, like we have a need today, right? You look around Seaside today, we have an affordable housing gap already. And so basically what they're saying is you're below the line. You're not even at the line, let alone above the line. And so some of what it's not necessarily everyone's going to come here who's low income. We have low income people here who are now renting up because they can't find anything in their income level.
You're right, though. I mean, the highest numbers are right here, and certainly that's much easier to accommodate those higher income levels than the lower ones, but both in terms of numbers as well as just difficulty.
Yeah, I see a huge disconnect in how you turn high wage requirements and high materials requirements into building that turns into 0 to 30% AMI affordable.
Yeah.
And that's really where the huge disconnect becomes.
High land costs.
All of it, all of it
I mean,
together.
it's all subsidized, right? That's all.
That's
from
the only way it
It's
can
gotta
happen,
come from
yeah.
somewhere.
Is all 0 to 60 considered subsidized, or
Yeah,
0 to 50?
I would think
Yeah,
so.
definitely 0 to 30 is all subsidized, and then probably a lot of 30 to 60.
Yep.
60 to 80, maybe you start to see multifamily at those income levels. The 80 to 120, lots of times is smaller houses and middle housing, and then your 120.
And I'm trying to do some math again.
Yep.
Of 1,600 plus 467 plus 318 plus 124 plus 365 doesn't equal 1,835 to me.
We just copied and pasted these from the report too.
That doesn't even go close to equaling out.
Nope.
There's a detailed table underneath this. I'll look at the table and I'll send it to you if you want
That's
to.
weird, because I'm pretty sure we just
Maybe
copied,
it's a 2835 or something.
or else we just made an error, but it should be on that. Yeah.
Jeff, the
I
apartment
apologize for
that's going in across from the police station, is there any subsidy there, or is that just market rate?
All market rate.
Do we know how many units are going in there?
60 to 66 units.
Two-story or three?
I think this should be
Is
603.
it two-story or three?
Does that
Three
math
stories.
work better?
And they should pour the first foundation this week, next week, so.
It's a lot closer.
That's 2,000 something. Yeah, it's interesting.
Are they doing
No, I think
ADA
total
housing
housing
as
35.
well?
For
Any
it's actually
ADA?
required by the building code, and I'm
Got it.
not sure how many units that would be.
1388,
It's pretty close.
It's small.
15.
But I think they are doing more.
It's pretty close.
Yeah, it's
I think
pretty
we
close. It's
made.
closer.
I think we made a mistake in the 1,000 there. It might be 603. So from our conversations with Jeff, we were just, as I mentioned, looking at a map and talking about different sites, and some of these might now overlap a bit with our large available sites that we identified earlier. Most existing lands are slated for development, so in not too long, that inventory that we talked about is going to be a heck of a lot lower. Large areas include the area, the old high school in and around the high school, and the area between North Holiday Drive and US 101. Jeff informed us projects, these numbers might not be exactly right, but 60 units of affordable housing, a 57-unit apartment complex, and then I think we had an undetermined amount of apartments on some city-owned land.
The 69 units is the affordable housing that's on the city land.
Okay,
It's not
those are-
the 69 with the developer.
So we'll loop back with Jeff to fine tune that. And then Jeff talked to us a little bit about strategies you're considering. I don't know if any of them have moved forward, but in terms of building heights and allowing taller building heights or mixed use development, some of the more policy and code types of strategies to help encourage additional housing.
I'm curious, what kind of strategies are there to encourage people who own vacant land within the city now, where maybe they tore down a house or something else, and it's just sitting there vacant? And it's, it's in a neighborhood.
I think this is a group conversation, certainly where we start this discussion. I think infrastructure is one of the answers. The more that the city can do in terms of making sure those sites are served with infrastructure, that's going to lower the cost for developers. What do you have thoughts on that, Alyssa?
You're talking about land that's just vacant, where a property
Yeah.
owner might not be motivated to do anything.
In my
right?
ward, I can think of probably 5 pieces.
I mean, there's all kinds of tools, right? You could start stepping up code enforcement and look for violations and make it uncomfortable for them to hold property. You could put a tax on it. You could have Jeff and I go knock on doors and say, hey, let's do some housing.
Yeah, you can do incentives too, right? Like what's allowed on that parcel, and if more is allowed, which is gonna increase their return, that could be an incentive.
You're leading into discussions that we want to have with our comprehensive plan that really surround dwelling unit densities and lot sizes. So if you want to encourage the infill into those vacant lots within the city, where right now you can only build one house, maybe we look through our comprehensive plan and zoning code amendments to decrease that 5,000 square foot lot to 2,500. Now you're incentivizing developers to actually build on those vacant lands.
Land parking requirements, that's a big one.
Parking requirements.
I mean, that prohibits all kinds of development.
Definitely upzoning, things like the suburban residential being able to be more dense.
I would, if you want to go out and look at something, look at 12th Avenue next to Goodman Park. I don't know what they're building there, but they don't have a very big lot and they're building a lot. So, and they have no street parking, as we know. Interesting to see what they're doing.
So we're going to be fine tuning and revising based on feedback we get from you and following up with Jeff. If there's any additional information on housing actions, it sounds like that may come as more part of the comprehensive plan study, so maybe we won't have those in this report, but to the extent that there is any specific proposals, we can include those. And then as I mentioned, we'll be preparing this final report and executive summary. We'll get that to you, Jeff, for a final review, make sure everything's dialed in, and then you'll have that as a basis for these comprehensive plan housing discussions or any other discussions that you might have. And like I said, we'll provide them in a format where when projects do come through, you can easily refine them and keep that information up to date. That is the extent of our presentation. So I don't know if there's more questions or discussion that you folks want to have. It sounds like you've been talking about these issues for quite some time.
Thank you.
Yeah. There is a parcel behind what we called the Thousand Trails land. It's that purple, and I guess there is a little bit of green on it. I know that was for sale, and I just didn't see a lot of green up there, so it must be very steep. Yeah.
That's that area that's kind of been logged out. Is that the one you're talking about up there?
Stimson on here. Okay. So we're out of land. It's 80 acres.
Including Thousand Trails.
Yeah, exactly.
Thousand Trails would be extra.
Anything else, Jeff?
Well, we'll get the maps to you guys so you guys can go and look and get that information to me so we can make this as accurate as possible. And you'll see, get down towards downtown in that resort residential zone, you'll see vacant parcels of land that are being used as parking.
That's right.
Employee parking for businesses, employee parking for a hotel that's right there, that's just always been part of the hotel, that they had an expansion plan at some point and never materialized, so they just park on that lot now. So there's lands that are vacant, but they are being used for something right now, which, you know, makes it kind of difficult to exclude it from the inventory per the prescriptive method that these guys have to work under that the state sets. So it's not here we're just gonna do a inventory for the city of Seaside. There's a prescriptive method set by state law that they have to follow to actually do this work.
When we get these maps, I assume when you drill down, you can see what, tax lot number?
Yes, you should be able to.
So
Well, maybe not
should-
tax lot number, but tax lot lines.
But how do we refer specific lots to you and say, you know, what's the deal on this one?
The account number is the easiest thing for me.
Yeah, you can zoom in using Clatsop County web maps too and see the tax lot, and actually the tax lot number will be fine, or account number is fine. Anyway,
Or the space right next door to X.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I'm just wondering, yeah, the map specifically here, when you drill farther down into it, is it just lots and there's no identification?
I'm not sure, I don't think the parcel numbers are on there. I think it is just lots.
Okay,
Can this
so
map be overlaid on GIS, I guess is what the question is.
I don't know if they have a layer for the
necessary.
county.
Yeah, they probably don't. So you may have to have two maps open. If you don't know how to get the county maps, it's real easy. Just go to the county website and there's a button right on the front page to go web maps.
Search Clatsop County GIS, it'll take you right to it.
And you can also schedule a time to come in and sit down with me if you've got it highlighted somewhere, and we can look at it, map in my office and figure it out there too. So feel free to do that if you need to.
Okay?
If I could, one
Yeah.
quick update or correction, the question about the parcels of 5 acres or greater. So the information was correct. I think I just misstated it. So there are 20 parcels of 5 acres or greater, but the buildable acres on those parcels is only 29 acres, right? So once they're 5 acre parcels, but once you remove the constraints, there's a lot. So I should have said buildable acres if I didn't, so I apologize for that.
Very helpful.
All right.
Yeah, that was great, thank you.
You got some homework now.
When's it due?
As soon as they get the maps to you.
I'll get it out to you as soon as I can.
Okay. Anything else? Got a little time to get set up? We're adjourned.